I strongly believe that to be able to paint beautiful paintings has nothing to do with talent. All you need is the willingness to put the time and effort into it. And if you decide to learn with me, I can help you to make this happen. My name is Victoria Majestic. I'm an award-winning fine artist and art instructor. I am a classically trained painter, studied both in Europe and in the United States. Do you want to improve your art but not sure where to start? Start by learning from the old masters. Copying old masterworks has been a centuries-old tradition among art students to learn new techniques and old secrets. I created this video series with two goals in mind: to inspire and to help you to improve your paintings. I will show you step by step how to approach each subject. I will create a black and white value study first, and then create a final color painting of each selected work. If you watched my free videos where I demonstrate how to create a value checker, this is one that I will be using as my reference throughout the work that I'm doing. And now I will mix my range of grays based on this value scale, where I will have at least 9 different values to work with. You can do less. I wouldn't recommend to go much more than 9 because that's just going to become overwhelming and it's not really necessary. So I'm starting with my light. When you mix colors, it's a good idea to start with your light color and add the dark to it. And I will create a mid-tone gray that's not too dark and not too light. Try to be right in the middle. So on the value scale, it would be this one right here. And I have to add a little more black to this to achieve that. And I'm happy with this one. And now I already have 3 values. I will break it up into further 2. And from there on, I'm just going to mix it as I go. So I will put one of this here and here. And I'll make one that's a little darker than this. You could also do this if you mix enough of the middle value, and that's usually how I demonstrate it. If you have enough of this, just take some of this, add a little bit more black, and you are right there at a darker step than this one. And the opposite, on the light side, you would take some of this and add white to it, and then you would end up with a lighter one than this one. I didn't mix enough, so I'm just going the other way around. And here, a little bit. So now I'm in a lighter value range here. So I have 5 different values to start with. I will take a cotton rag next and dip it in what I'm doing right now, putting on gloves because I don't want to get paint and solvent all over my hand. So I'm taking a cotton rag. It's a good idea to use one that's lint-free, so an old cotton t-shirt piece would do it just fine. And I'm dipping it into my solvent. And I will take some of my lighter value here and just rub it all over the canvas. I'm trying to stay thin as far as the layer goes, and as far as how oily it is. That's why I'm using a solvent, not a medium, because I need to follow the fat over lean principle. Otherwise my painting might end up cracking. So this is just to get rid of the stark bright surface. and it allows for an easier value judgment. So this is as dark as I will go. And of course, this is good if it's prepared ahead of time and it's dry already. Mine is still wet, but it's still possible to work on it, just a little bit trickier. I will be starting with a number 2 brush, and I will create a simple sketch. And for that, I will divide the canvas up into 4 main parts. So I'm going in the center here, and I'm just eyeballing it. You could measure it out if you're not sure or you don't have enough practice to eyeball it close enough. And I'm looking at my reference where I also have those marks. You could go even further and create a full grid, which actually probably I should demonstrate, and I will do that next, so you get a really good idea how to create the drawing part if you're not sure about it. If you are not sure in your drawing skills, or you just want to be really precise with the image that you are copying, then the tool that you could use, a simple tool that's been used for a long time among artists, is the grid method, where I'm going to show you how to divide up the picture. So I like to do quarters, or in this case, if it's a little bit more complex, I could break it up into 8ths. So I will do that. I start measuring out the distances and then mark the halfway points. So in this case, it's exactly 4 inches in the middle. And I will do the vertical as well, which is almost done. So I'm just going to rough estimate this here, and also here. And once I have those 4, it's an easy, just connecting the dots. I'm just using a marker, but you could use pencil or whatever you'd like to pen. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to switch my ruler to a shorter one, because this is just too long to work with here in this space. And now I'm going to divide. I could leave it at this, and normally if it's a simple subject and I'm creating a master copy and I still want to be close to the image I want, then I would just do that. But in this case, I'm going to divide it up again one more time. Now, if I paint a still life, just a regular still of my own work and not doing a master copy, I wouldn't create an exact grid like this and break it up into small sections. Normally, I work from life and I just rely on only my eyes and what I think the sizes and arrangement should be. So in live painting, obviously, I'm not using anything like this. And now I'm dividing this up into further sections. So that's 2 and 2 here. And same thing on the bottom. 2 and 2. And vertically, I have it right about here and here. And I can fit there with my ruler. marker. For some reason my marker stopped working, so I need to switch to another one. Actually, I'm gonna use a pencil. That's what I have at hand. And same thing here, finish the line. And so there it is. This is my grid. And now I'm going to recreate my grid on my canvas. The next step would be to figure out either the proportion of your reference material and make sure that your canvas size or the size of the picture that you are going to paint is the same or very similar, or you could measure it out if your printout matches, or you want to match the printout size, which in this case is 8 by 10, and I measured it out here. So after that, it's really simple. I already have the halves. Now I just have to do the quarters, and I'm just eyeballing these. I'm not actually measuring it with a ruler. It's going to be close enough to where I want it to be. And for here, so this one is a half, and I'm somewhere about here with a quarter. And just a very faint line. You could just omit this part, and normally that's what I do, and just do it by eye based on those marks on the edge. I'm just doing it for the purpose of the demonstration now. And again, we will paint over this, so it's not really crucial to be perfect with this. What's more important is you want to be light with your touch and very thin with the paint. So I diluted my paint with my solvent, which is Gamsol. And I'm just using a very, very thin layer to do this. So from here on, this is a simple matter of copying. It shouldn't be too difficult to anyone, even if you don't have any kind of drawing skills. You basically just look at the shapes and draw them where you see them on the reference. And even if they are not perfect, it's okay. You will have plenty of time to make corrections. And going up here. So what you need to look out for when you do this is look where those lines cross. So for example, here is my grid line, those two, and I looked at the reference and approximated where this little curving line crosses on each one of these grid lines. So these are the intersections. You want to look at where the intersections are. That will help you to make your drawing more precise. And I do the same thing on the other side. And again, unless you're creating a museum copy or some sort of work like that, you don't have to be perfect with your drawing. But I just went way too far to the left. I just realized I skipped one grid line and went too far. So actually this line would be here, not over there. So you do have to pay attention when you're doing this. And going down here, crossing there, and coming through right about here. So I will fix that part by simply wiping it with a rag. And this is a symmetrical object. Whenever you have something like that, you could double check your shape and size by putting a center line. And I see that this is not exactly what it should be. So I'm making some minor corrections here as far as the shape goes. And it's still not final. So when I start to block in the painting, I still have time to make corrections. Unless you're working with a medium that dries very, very fast, that could be a little bit trickier, especially if you're working with watercolor. Then this might not be as easy for you to do these corrections. If you're working with acrylics, well, you could use an extender that makes the drying time shorter, or you could work fast. That's an option too. Even acrylics is not that easy just to wipe out once it dries, as it is with oils. And now I'm moving on to the next object, which is right about here, coming down. And when you do these drawing sketches, try to look at the negative spaces as well between two large positive shapes. That could give you a pretty good clue what your drawing should look like if you follow. And sometimes it's easier to see those smaller negative shapes than the larger positive ones. So this is right here. This area is my negative space. And I'm not worried about little details. I'm trying to just roughly sketch in my larger shapes. And a little bit of here. Again, I'm looking at the negative space. It's like kind of like a heart shape, started heart shape, like here. And coming down with a little jar. And then I have peppers here. And again, I'm looking at the shapes and sizes and where those shapes fall. So this is my grid line here. I have to stay above that. This pepper is above this line. And then there is one more coming into the picture here. Goes about halfway. And coming down here. Again, my goal is not a museum quality replica. This is more like for practice purposes. And for that, I don't have to be very literal or exact, especially not with the sketch. It will be close enough to the original to take away the main points, which is to see how the artist solved certain problems in this painting. Because every painting have its own challenges and every artist solves it differently. But masters have their own way of doing it because they made so many mistakes already. They know what's the best way to describe or solve a problem. And that is partly why it's such a good practice to use master paintings or to create master studies, because the artist already solved your problem, the problem in still life, and The solution is right there. You just have to study it closely enough to really understand it. And by copying it, we gain a whole lot better understanding than just looking at it. And finally, there's one here. And I'm not worried about little stems and stuff like that yet, anyways. I'm not worried about reflections. I will put in this line at least for now. I might paint over it at some point and put it back in. It's taking out and putting back objects into your painting, that could be a common practice. And the less afraid you are of removing stuff, even if you worked on it for a while, the better it is, because you should never let your painting intimidate you. And finally, this comes down here. Actually, this is the outside, and that's the top. And again, this is just the sketch part. I will make adjustments. As far as background goes, there is not much to do as far as sketching goes. I don't want to make too many marks because there is no reason. So next I will block in a little bit of background before I move on to the actual main subject or focal point. I will use also flat but number 6. This is a softer brush, but you could use any, and I might switch over to my bristles. This is not bristle. This is actually an acrylic brush. And I will just make a little test here. Well, there is one thing that I haven't done, and I think it would be a good idea, and normally I do that, so I will do it now, is either come up with your darkest dark, lightest light, or both of them. In this case, I will come up with my darkest dark, which will be in this bottle here, and perhaps here, and in the neck of this jug or jar. And I won't use pure black, but I will use something very close to that. I'm only going to put a little bit of light in it. The reason for choosing one of those two or both is because it's going to give you a really good reference point which way to go with the other values. If you don't do that, you are just second guessing yourself. It's harder to figure out. Of course, you could use also a value checker and base your decision on that. That's another solution. Or you could do both. Find your darkest darks, lightest lights, and use a value checker to make sure that everything is what you do is correct. And for now, I'm just blocking this in as one large dark shape. I'm not breaking it up into smaller, lighter parts. I have some of these darks up here and up here as well. And I'm taking more of my darks. I will eventually have some in here and down here in this area as well. There might be subtleties between them, as far as the value goes, but they're very minimal. So I'm just ignoring those minimal subtleties for now, and I'm just using this for my reference. And some darks down on the other side here. And keep going with my darkest darks. Again, I'm blocking in this whole shape as one dark, even though I see that there are some lighter areas, but I'm just blocking in simple shapes for now. And finally, there's some darks here. So I have my darkest darks. I'm not concerned about my lightest lights now. I will just move on to figuring out my background. And I was close, as now I'm double checking this value that I placed there already, but not exactly there. It needs to be a hair darker. So I will do that, make this a little bit darker. I think now I'm too dark. So I will go in between the two. And especially with a value study, it's crucial to try to get as close as you can to those values that you are seeing. That's the whole purpose of the value study. We don't have the color to distract us. And a little bit on the other side. And here it's going to get lighter everywhere else other than these few cast shadows. Now I'm switching over to a lighter average, which I'll use this one. And I'm thinning it a little bit with a little bit of solvent. I don't want to be too thick. This looks like a light wash on a painting, even lighter than this. And I will switch over to a bristle brush. I think this is just way too smooth, too soft to create the texture that I see in the reference photo. So I'm switching to, this is a rosemary brush flat. Switching to this, and I'll try to spread my paint a little bit better. And this feels a lot more like what it should. Maybe because I'm used to working with them a lot more than soft brushes. And when I'm looking at the reference, it almost feels like that the artist used something to create marks in this block, in this background. Almost like he used a rag to create some texture, which I'll give it a try and see how it looks. Now, I need a little bit lighter values as I progress upwards. So I'm adding white and creating another value. And just kind of blocking it in loosely. Not worried about the marks yet. And a little more here and here. And then the foreground as well. So the foreground is pretty light. I'm using this lighter value and blocking it in. I'm not worried about my drawing or sketching. I just need to know roughly where things are at this point. And I will give it a try with a rag and see if I can create a similar pattern or texture rather in my painting as I can see it. So I'm wrinkling up my rag, and I want to see if I can create those marks that I see. And it has a similar feel actually, but I will soften some of these marks. This is a little too dark. And create a little bit more softness. Down here too, I'll add some darker values, just a little bit to create a little more interest and texture. And you can see I'm moving my brush, kind of spinning it around in my hand as I go. Just like that, just like that. And for now, I think I'm satisfied with the background. I might do some more work on it later. For now, I think I will leave it alone, because really this is not about the background, it's mostly about the focal point. I just saw that this was a little bit too defined, this darker line here. That's what I just want to break up. And that's all as far as that goes. Now I will block in my focal point, which is this jug. And I'm looking at the reference photo. Most of my darks are in the upper section of this vase, except for the lightest light, which is in the center. I will just simply block those darks in. And again, I will use this value checker just for a minute, and I will place it on my reference just to double check my value. And I think it's kind of in between these two values here. So it's not the darkest dark, but not the one step before either. It's the in-between value. So I will mix something similar to that and just block it in for now. I already started here. And I will just continue a little bit. Might be a little bit more difficult if you're using a different medium where you don't have the luxury of keep going back and correcting. Then you have to be more careful than what you see me doing here. But if you use oils, you can just go really loosely, and you don't have to be perfect or exact for the first time, because you're going to have so many opportunities to make corrections and adjustments in your values and shapes. I could fill in this whole thing and wipe out the center, but it's easy enough to go around it, at least most of it anyways. And the next step I will do is I will step back, look at my painting from a distance, because sometimes our eyes get fatigued. We get used to what we see too much, and it's harder to notice mistakes. So stepping back, or using a mirror, or taking a picture and turn it upside down Could be useful tools to see better what's going on, what should be different, and all that. So I'm stepping back now, and I think my vase is tipping a little bit to the right, so I will have to come up a little higher with this line. But it's a very light area. I will have to make it lighter, even where I just drew the correction. That's better. And also my curve here, it needs to be a little bit adjusted, because it's not exactly what it is on my painting. And I'm satisfied with this for the moment. I will add, still with this big brush, I will add a little bit more dark up here. Bring this shape down here. I'm looking at the negative space again. Need to make it a little smaller. And carve it. And carve it again. I will need to cut back on this, but for now it's okay. A little bit of this mid-tone value here. And my next step will be blocking in the lower part of the jug, which is a lot lighter value. Since it's a metal, what you see for the most part is a reflection of this flat surface. So I will clean my brush, or you could switch it to another one with a clean bristle, and pick up some light value. I will test it here, and I think I'm happy with this. So I will block in with this one. There's lots of texture going on in my reference, which I will add after I blocked in. But for now, I'm just blocking in. And I'm not worried about detail yet, like the little belt or whatever is going across here. I'm just ignoring it for the moment, because when we are blocking in, we shouldn't be worried about detail. We should be worried about the large shapes and our values. Not so much about detail. And there's a section here in the middle that's lighter, so I'm leaving that alone. There's light here coming down. Again, this is the time you could still adjust your shapes to whatever you necessary. Now I'm stepping back again, looking at my block in. And next I will start to add some even lighter values. I will pick up some lighter values, adding some white here. And this is not my highlight yet, but the lower part has pretty bright values here. So I'm starting to work those bright values into or onto the surface. And they don't have a defined edge. It's kind of just a rough, rugged edge. I'm keeping that in mind. There are some lighter shapes here and there throughout. There's light on the left. Since I have a light value, I add some of that here. It should be all the way on the edge, right there. And then there's a little bit on that line that comes across here. It's like a decorative element on this jug. And then I have a highlight here and a highlight on the neck. And this one here is an upright surface, and it's a so-called side plane where the light is not as strong as it is here. It's a different angle, so it faces the light differently, and that's causing it to become a different value. And then there's a bright light right there. Of course, I could use a smaller brush at this point, but I don't want to start to go into too much detail yet. And the larger brush prevents me to do that. And you could try that too. If you have a hard time avoiding too much detail too soon, switch over to a larger brush, something that you don't feel as comfortable with, and use that instead of a small one or smaller one. And then this is the highlight part, so I need almost pure white for that. And the edges are kind of broken. It's an interesting shape. It rather consists of smaller strokes. I'm using the corners of the brush. I'm kind of placing it, keep turning it sideways. And same thing coming downwards. It starts to get a little lighter here. It's a lighter value all the way around here. And also up here, it has kind of a halo effect. As you can see, there is more light up around here too, and around the sides. Trying to soften those edges a little bit. And same thing on the other side. Lighter values all around here. And just a textured rough edge. Going back for a second to the middle part. I'm not the lightest yet, but for now this is just a blocked in stage where I just want to be roughly correct, or as close as I can get for now. And I will go revisit this part eventually. Right. Down here as well, there is two brighter areas. So a little bit here, taking more white. It's kind of a brighter spot. And there's on this side too, that appears to be brighter. Notice how I keep picking up fresh paint. If I do this and keep going over and over the same stroke without picking up fresh paint, it's just going to become a mess, and I will have a very hard time to keep my values clean. So try to do that to avoid too many strokes over and over, which I also call tickling the canvas. The canvas doesn't like to be tickled. So to avoid that, try to always pick up fresh paint if you need to go over the same stroke repeatedly. So right now, these two are competing too much, and this needs to be a lot brighter. I know it already. I'm leaving it at this for just a little bit, and I will move on to the peppers, and then I'll go with a smaller brush and refine everything. That's going to be the final step to refining everything, values and shapes, details. So next are the peppers. I'm using a number 2 bristle brush, flat, and I look at the shadow values. Those are the darker ones, and I use this one here. I'm taking it and placing the dark one where I see those darks, and I need a little bit darker than this, so I'm adding more black right here, because this one back here is really dark. I want to make sure I'm correct with that. There are some reflected peppers too that are pretty dark. Value, and eventually here too there's some dark reflection. I'm just approximating shapes now. Value shapes, dark value shapes. Sorry, I just realized that my microphone was off or away from me, so I'd like to go over what I just said. I'm starting with these dark value shapes on the peppers. And just put them approximately where I think they should go. There is still room to adjust. If I make mistakes or if I'm not happy with what I have. There's one that should be coming up higher here, which is this one. And there's the one behind. So some of the cast shadows on these peppers are pretty dark. Cast shadow is the part where the object touches the surface and casts a shadow on the surface underneath. Those are usually the darkest ones in general. And there are some up here. I'm still not using black though, even though these are very dark shadows. I don't think they're as dark as black. And now that I put my darkest darks as far as shadows go on the peppers, I will, I'm gonna use one more place that I just noticed that I covered up is here. There's a dark shadow going here. And it kind of comes out as a cast shadow right here. And I want to soften this a little bit. That's better. All right, so now that I established those, I will come up with an average value for each of the peppers. I'm going to move slowly, and I'm going to the next value, which is this right here. And use that to block in some of them. I don't want to jump to the light too quickly, because without shadows there is no form. Just light itself can't give you a form. You need shadows, or darker shapes anyways. And this is still the point where you don't want to add detail, because we still, as long as you have exposed canvas or background, it's better to cover them all up, block them in, and then start to go over detail and adjusting shapes and values and everything else. And I have one here. It will probably get darker and lighter in some spots. And then finally I'm starting to shift over this middle value here. I'm going to bring this up higher a little bit, and I will bring this one up higher as well. And then there is a little bit more light in the one front of it, which is this one, even more so. So I'm adding even more light here and here. This is a gradual transition here between light and shadow. So I'm trying to create a halftone part. And there's a little bit of a reflected light right down here. Next pepper in the foreground here that has light on it. I'm using this lighter value. And this one as well. Soft transition, I'm not touching this. Adding a little bit more form here with this lighter value. And a little bit more light here. Getting rid of that dark in the middle, it's too dark. And I move on to this one. I keep comparing my values to the background and see if I'm dark enough or light enough. And also you have to think about, for example, oil paint and acrylics will dry a little bit darker than what they are when they wet. So you need to calculate that into your painting when you make value decisions, because as it dries, it darkens. And if you make it too dark already right off the bat, then it's going to be too dark when it dries. So always stay a little bit, just a hint lighter than what you think you need. And I think I'm way too flat here with this pepper. I will need to make the shape a little bit larger, so I have to go over my shadow there. This is the point where I will start to refine everything and start to add some detail to my shapes and values. Break them up a little bit. This is a master copy, so if you do a master copy, it's really up to you how precisely you want to copy the work. I want to be close enough where it's recognizable and I can really learn from what the artist did. So I want to bring it close enough to that point, but I don't want to go insanely detailed or insanely precise or accurate copying the artist. So I would just go with some amount of detail, but not too much. At least that's my goal. I have some final thoughts on this value study. So I walked out of my studio after my last words, and what I've done is just rested my eye, and this is a good practice besides stepping back from your painting, is walking away for a few minutes or a few hours or sometimes even days from your painting. And when you come back and look at the painting, usually you see it with a fresh eye. And with that fresh eye, it's easier to notice, not mistakes, but places where they need adjustments or whatever areas you haven't noticed that needs more work. It becomes more obvious once your eyes are not fatigued. And that's what happened to me. I went to have dinner, and when I came back, I just noticed a few things that I wanted to express before I call it a finished study. One of those things is this upper portion of this jug. You can see it on, if you look carefully on the reference photo, that this section of the jug and this section of the jug is slightly lighter than the lower parts. And it's because it's facing, this part facing the light more in an angle where it's directly facing the light, where on the other part is an upright and it's not a direct, not as direct as the top part. So this is the adjustment that I need to make, that I realized after coming back from a little break. And I'm just adding subtle lights. Now these are not nowhere near as bright values as the focal point or highlight on the jug, but they still light enough where you can see them. And same thing on the other side. So I'm using these values closer to the mid-tone, the medium value. And I will add a few here too. Also, I've tried to imitate the brush strokes to some degree, so it looks like a hammered surface or rugged surface, because it's pretty obvious from the reference that it's not smooth. It has those little dips. And here too needs a little bit more break, just to make it more realistic, convincing looking. And the line comes in here. And I will step back now and take a second look and make sure, and this was a little softer, make sure that it looks the way it should, or similar, more similar to my reference. And it is definitely an improvement. I can see the whole surface now kind of turning. The last area I'd like to express is just a little bit of reshaping this form here. It's not a big deal, it's really a slight adjustment. And I'm taking my light color, but it's almost white, and just carving out a little bit more from this top section here by using the background color, or background value to be more precise. And with every painting, whether it's a study or a final painting, it's a good idea to double check your edges, the outside lines, the outlines on the forms, and see how they relate to the background behind them, or whatever surrounds them. And what I mean by that, you want to see whether there's a hard line on the edge, a soft, or something that kind of disappears and melts into the background. And here I need some adjustments. And I want to make some, add some darks up there too. I just think this should be a little darker here. So I will add a little bit more dark. Same thing on the other side. Adjustment on the dark. And also here on the handle. And now I'm stepping back again, looking at it. Last area I'm seeing is here. I think could use a little bit more shape adjustment right here. And there is a highlight that I missed right in here. And since this is really just a value study, I think I took it probably beyond the level I needed to. But I wanted to make sure that I can show you really what's involved in a master copy, and also in still life painting, since this is a still life. And I hope you enjoyed this demonstration, and if you are interested to learn more, you are welcome to check out my other courses, and perhaps I can help you to make you a better painter and help you to improve your art.